And welcome to Steve Shenk on Food. We're so glad you joined us again. We've been talking with Steve Shenk, the food expert. And if you watched our first show, we hope that you're back because you had some invaluable information that would help you and your family survive the drought. Now, on today's show, we're going to be talking about a range of things, but mostly we're going to be focusing on health and what impact of food has on your health and the kind of food you choose. And Steve, of course, is an author, a philanthropist, and an entrepreneur in the food industry for almost 40 years. And he absolutely knows what he's talking about when it comes to food solutions for families. So, Steve, I'm so glad you do the show. It's such a great honor to host with you.
Well, thank you. It's a lot of fun to talk about the greatest dependency we all have. And there are some things that a lot of people don't realize that I think that might be useful that we can share with them. And I think it'll be kind of an enjoyable experience for everybody.
Well, there's a lot of great, if you look out there on the internet and in the newsstands, there's a lot of magazines, a lot of people, bloggers talking about health and food. And you're hearing things like GMO, non-GMO, MSG, no MSG, hydrogenated oil. And you're wondering, okay, can anything I eat be safe? And people are even saying that vegetables have lost their value because the soil is depleted. You're hearing so many things. And yet the greatest wealth is health. It's a quote I just pulled out for you. And that's our greatest wealth. So we should be taking care of that.
Well, there are a lot of people that have had great illnesses and been able to cure them and deal with them, recover from them by using food as the greatest medicine. And that's one of the quotations that flutters around out there a lot of times. But and you've got other things. We are what we eat. And that could be embarrassing for some people, but the fact is that...
And I love this. Have you heard that one? If you don't take care of your body, where are you going to live? I love that one, too.
That's a good point. I'd not heard that. That's kind of cute. But anyway, and I live for cute, as you know. So we've got a lot of people in great distress. One of the reasons that food programs like this have become very, very popular, people... are watching the chef competitions because they love food. And oddly enough, food is at the center of our entire lives. Socially, you can't dine with somebody and not get to be acquainted with them, and it's a very comfortable social situation. We have things called comfort food. People that are under stress eat to deal with the stress. Food is sustenance, and food just means so much to us, but yet we have troubled health in our country. We have a tremendous amount of obesity. We have difficulties with young people having the energy levels to even reach the minimum physical standards for some of these exercise. The president's whatever the program is, that
fitness program,
that they qualify for. And we have folks that are alive, but they're basically existing on pharmaceuticals. Where do we attack this or address this first? Well, a lot of times people have a sense or know what they should do, but if we all did what we should do, we wouldn't have a lot of the problems that we have. A lot of the fast foods, you've all seen the comparisons where the one person lived for some period of time on a certain fast food. I won't name the name, but everybody knows who they are. But and became so severely obese, and their health was so severely hampered that their doctors wouldn't even let them go for the stipulated amount of time that they were going to go. And this is the kind of stuff that people are eating every day out of convenience or whatever.
And it's less expensive. I saw a report where moms are taking their kids through a drive-through once a day and spending the $5 they have on the dollar menu just so they get a little something to eat because it's cheaper than going to a store.
Yeah. Well, and you've got food prices that are exacerbating that. And so what do we do with it? I have people calling all the time that are saying, well, what about MSG, and what about hydrogenated oil? What's going on with sodium? And we're developing foods in our companies that are getting probably the best food on the planet out to families, but in doing so, there's some things that you have to understand. Added MSG, for example, monosodium glutamate. A lot of people have an intense reaction to that.
I think Chinese. When I hear MSG, I think Chinese.
Right. And the thing is that when you hear MSG, you should think food. It's in almost everything. But when it occurs naturally, it's a little different deal. So it's like every single food is basically a chemical formula. It's just a combination of various chemicals put together, making up what turns out to be a carrot or a piece of meat or whatever. And those chemicals are part of what give it the flavor and do everything. But it's like many people who are into health and nutrition realize that some of the concentrated vitamins that you can take, just all vitamin C or all vitamin A or all vitamin D, where people are trying to self-medicate, a lot of times they will throw off the balance of the other vitamins and minerals by putting too much of more of that particular vitamin in to their mix than they should have, and they have all sorts of negative repercussions because you have to have that balance. Well, it's the same way with food. Taking MSG as an example, the highest incidence naturally occurring of MSG is in garden peas. Now, most people think in terms of MSG as kind of a meat flavor or the kind of flavor that you get on those highly processed potato chips that are very addictive, and that's why the MSG is on there, by the way.
Why?
But why? Because it's addictive.
MSG
they want people to eat. Oh yeah, people to eat more of that
stuff.
stuff.
That's why you can't put those bags down.
Yeah, there you go. And the other thing is that MSG has the quality of giving people the impression that they're actually eating food that is good. We're actually basically nutritionalists. And our way of testing food for its nutrition and whether it's good or bad is, does it taste like a carrot? Does it feel like a carrot when we chew on it? Does it look like a carrot? And if it does, all of those, it's probably a carrot. Well, what happens is there are different grades and qualities of food. Don't know if you realize this, but a lot of the prepared foods are made with a lower quality or a number 3 or 4 grade of vegetable, and by putting in these what they call flavor enhancers, it will fool the taste buds into thinking that you're eating a good quality of nutritious food. You trust yourself more than anything out there. Someone can say this is good for you, but if you eat it and you feel like, yeah, that's good for me, then you trust that. So our taste, the way it tastes, the way it feels, all of our senses that we put into eating are what we actually measure whether we want something or not. Well, what happens if you have something that's addictive, like the added MSG? A lot of foods have naturally occurring MSG. It's not only not bad for you. It's not only bad for you. It's not only not bad for you, but it's actually good for you because it's part of the food. Okay. But if you add too much of it, then it becomes virtually a poison.
So how do they make this non-natural MSG? Is it a chemically made MSG, or is it something they extract from other food sources?
They can basically make it very quickly, almost the same way as it occurs naturally. But very simply, all they do is they isolate out the basic chemical formula that makes up MSG. So what they do is they take something that has glutamic acid in it, they isolate out the glutamic acid, add a single sodium salt to it, and it becomes mono or single sodium salt glutamate or glutamic acid. So that becomes that portion of the chemical makeup of the food, but they isolate it out, and so it's not all that wonderful for you. But that's just one of the examples.
But the naturally occurring MSG is fine for you.
Yeah, it's just part of the food.
But there's less MSG. So, let's just take the garden peas. If you were to grow some in your garden, there would be naturally occurring MSG in it.
Right.
If the peas you grew in your garden were a different grade, and by the way, I'm curious how that's decided.
It's just. For example, if you grow a pea, a Green Giant, for example, has their baby peas. These are not quite fully mature peas. Ultimately, the pea is intended to be a seed. And so that pod, if it's left on the vine, will eventually dry up and the pea will become really hard. And then you plant it the next year if it's a variety that you can do that. But so as it's harvested, you get the new peas, the little bitty guys that are really tender and just really taste like a lot of pea.
My grandma used to make those little baby peas from Green Giant. Yeah.
And then they mature a little bit more, and they're a number 1 grade pea and number 2 grade peas. As they mature, number 3 is getting a little bit hard, and number 4 is kind of, you got to cook it, and it'll still be kind of.
So grade 1 is the best for you.
1, 2, 3, 4, depends. All different.
So it's kind of like discounts.
Yeah.
Right, discount brand or
That's
something.
kind of like it is. I wanted to relate it to the grading of milk, but then I knew you weren't raised on a farm either. So, the way they take these things to market, they're graded when they take them into market. And if you have a certain percentage of number 1 grade peas, then you get paid more.
So that's why it costs more.
That's why they cost more.
So if you buy an off-brand can or bag of frozen peas and it's less expensive, you could be buying grade 3 or 4 peas.
There you go.
And so there's less nutrients in those.
There's less nutrients. They're less appetizing. They don't have the flavor.
And so that's why they have the MSG to kind of take back what nature automatically
took. There you go.
Okay.
And by doing that, it's economically feasible for the processor because they can put a lower grade of stuff in. And in fact, sometimes they don't even put any stuff in at all and just put the flavoring, and then that becomes something that bypasses, by addictive, what it does is it bypasses the natural tendency to say, I'm full and I'm done with this, I've had enough. It bypasses the apostat, which says more or not enough.
And so if I eat the peas that are grade 4 with the MSG added, then I will think I'm full.
Well, you will actually have a tendency to eat more peas.
And then therefore sell more cans.
Or more potato chips.
Okay.
Or more munchies of any sort.
So why do the Chinese especially, why is it known for, why do the Chinese especially get credit for MSG?
Well, that's a factor. MSG is considered in many places, it used to be sold as MSG as a food flavoring. People will actually salt their stuff with it to give it more flavor. It tells the taste buds, hey, there's a lot of flavor here. It creates a reaction.
It makes sense.
Okay, and so a lot of times it's used in the cooking. Also, some of the soy products and things like that are fermented, and you can get some of that saltiness, that flavoring. And so it just very simply tends to be related to Chinese and Oriental restaurants.
So like perhaps even the soups I eat have MSG in it for that kind of flavoring to make up for what the actual ingredients lack.
Right, a lot of the canned soups do.
So the more people are using that MSG ingredient, then the more adverse reactions because people are eating it way more than they would normally eat it. We would normally have it in peas on Sunday dinner, maybe, and then we'd eat fresh the rest of the week. But now people are eating so much pre-canned, pre-made. There's more MSG. Wow. Okay. Very interesting. As a mom, that's something helpful to me.
Well, it's very important. Other things that are being added, for example, in any dry products, one of the things we work with in our companies is we have all dry products, but it's very difficult to have a dry base product that has any oil in it. You have to have an oil to actually, that's the way your taste buds pick up flavor, is through the oils. That's why when you add a lot of butter to stuff, you get a lot more flavor and that type of thing. But anyway, it's very difficult to have oil that is not hydrogenated. In order to dry an oil and make it into a solid, you have to hydrogenate it, which when you add that extra atom of hydrogen, it makes it a whole different animal and affects the body terribly. And so hydrogenated oil is very, very dangerous. And so all these things are being added.
Well, I have lots of questions about that as well. If you're watching us on Steve Shenk's site, thank you for joining us. You can find out more about Steve Shenk on steveshenk.me. But we're going to go to commercial break. And when we get back, can we ask him some more questions about hydrogenated oil?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, we'll be right back with more after this.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D, food? After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. What if you got a supply of the best food on the planet? Food that tastes better, is better for you, is safer, is less expensive, stores for a long time, stores in very little space, and is so fast and easy to prepare that a 10-year-old can present you with a gourmet meal in 20 minutes. How will it feel to be eating the most perfect food ever created and also have a food savings account for when all the gold you can save won't buy a single loaf of bread? I'm Steve Shenk, the creator of the superfood at eFoods Direct. Try it yourself. You can get six free meals, only pay shipping and handling. Go to efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. You can get 6 free meals, only pay shipping and handling. Events are rapidly moving to use food. You can get...
And welcome back to Steve Shenk on Food. Steve, thank you so much for sharing this information. Before the break, we talked about what monosodium glutamate is and why, the big hubbub about it. And I think that really helped me to know, what I'm looking for when I look for food items that have MSG or not have MSG, and then understanding that peas have them naturally. I didn't know that, so I'm glad to now. There's a quote by Doug Larson, comedian Doug Larson, and he says, life expectancy would grow by leaps and bounds if green vegetables smelled as good as bacon.
That's probably true.
It's probably, and I agree. I once read this article, and I think you'll think this is funny. It talked about going on the salad diet, and this woman went on a salad diet, and she said it was great. She ate salads every day for 21 days, and then she went to the scale, and she hadn't lost anything, and that's because of the dressings that she'd put on. And so we were talking before the break about hydrogenated oil. So maybe you could tell us, what is that? What is that one molecule of difference, and is it inexpensive to put in foods? What foods is that in, and what does it do to our body?
Well, very simply, what happens if you have an oil? Okay, you've seen dehydrated foods. What happens when you dehydrate a carrot?
Shrinks.
Yeah.
It's smaller.
Yeah, because you take the moisture out of it, right? Mm-hmm. How do you dehydrate oil?
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah. You don't have any moisture in it, so you can't dehydrate. Hydrate means water. Unwater it. You can't unwater oil. So what do you do if you have a recipe that needs to be dry? It needs to be a powder, so it'll, number one, store, and also so you can put it into some sort of a pack so you're not transporting water and things, and so people
water makes things heavy.
Yeah, so people can put the water back in. But what do you do if you have an oil that's necessary for the food to taste good and to have that recipe come together, as it were? Because oil itself is the means by which your flavors are carried to your taste buds and all. And so that's why, oddly enough, we try and avoid greasy food, but some good greasy food really has a lot of flavor. Well, it has a lot of flavor because that grease, that oil, is transferring or transmitting the flavors. And so if you're going to have a good flavored dehydrated food, which people can store back, and that's what we've worked with for years, is storable foods. And now people aren't storing them as much as they're eating right now because they're economically more feasible than what people get otherwise. But you have to get that oil to dry. Otherwise, you don't have dry food. You've got oily paste.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. So what happens...
Thank goodness you're the expert on storable foods.
Expert on storable foods?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, people wouldn't know that. People would just think you could do it yourself. We need you.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. Well, and here's why. You've all seen a bottle of Crisco oil. You've also seen next to it a can of Crisco,
yes,
the white lard equivalent. It's solid, okay, or semi-solid.
Yeah.
They're the same thing. The only difference is that they had to get they had to get the oil to a more solid state, so they hydrogenated it. Okay? Now, if you wanted to get to a more solid state like a powder, so you can put it into a dried recipe to rehydrate later, then you have to hydrogenate it more. So you have a partially hydrogenated, and then you have a really hydrogenated oil. And so what it does is it enables you to use an oil which can't be dehydrated in a product that is dry. Okay. The problem is that when you change the molecular structure of something, it becomes a whole different something. The Crisco oil is not the same in its effect in your body as the Crisco grease or as the dried oil powder. So you have to find some way to do that, and most manufacturers, it's a very expensive process to find, say, for example, a palm oil and actually find a way to dry it without dehydration but have it a dry powder. That's the process that we work with from time to time, but it's almost impossible for companies to do that and have it economically feasible. So, but that's a real issue.
And that's because you want to preserve foods so that they last longer on the shelf before people buy them in grocery stores.
Or have it convenient in a dried form.
Oh, they have like dried soup mixes and dried potatoes. Okay.
Or the flavoring in things like Hamburger Helper. All you do is add hamburger, but you've got all the seasonings, the flavorings, that powder that comes in with the macaroni or whatever. Well, guess what? In order to get that oil, to get that flavor, and have the oil in it, you have to hydrogenate it, or you find a means by which you dry oil, which is very difficult.
And expensive.
Now, there are other things that people are doing. We have people that are reacting negatively to wheat. They say that in this country, which is a wheat-based diet, because we're based on bread and other things to go with it, they say that 85% of the population in some way or another is reacting adversely to wheat just over the last 20 years. I mentioned earlier on one of the other programs the fact that people are now reacting adversely to peanut butter. Peanut butter and jelly, for crying out loud, has raised most generations of our kids. Yeah. And then you have a whole bunch of people that are worried to death about sodium content. Well, here's just a little bit of a nip on sodium. Table salt will kill you. All of the bad things you've heard about sodium apply to table salt, and that is the stuff that'll get you. But it's interesting. In the scriptures, those of you that have read the scriptures out there are references that say the man is not worth his salt. They used to pay people in salt. And you've got to ask yourself, okay, if they're talking about salt being favorable, but yet it's killing our population, what's the difference? Well, there's a huge difference between the salt that they're talking about back then and something called table salt, because what they were talking back then was dried sea salt, where they take seawater. And in fact, Mahatma Gandhi had a big tangle with the English government over their being able to go down and dry their own salt, because the English government wanted to charge them for the salt that they were getting from the sea. So they had a big knockdown and drag out over the thing, and that's one of the ways he threw England out of India, but that's a long story. The short story is that when table salt is refined, it's run through a blast of heat at something like 1,200 degrees or some crazy thing like that, that literally burns out everything except the sodium chloride. That's it. That's all that's left, just the rock. Okay? It has a salty flavor, but without the other things. Remember, we were talking earlier about every food having a chemical makeup. If you take out part of the chemical, it no longer is that food. Well, if you take out the minerals and everything that goes with this, the sodium chloride that makes up sea salt, all of a sudden you have that same problem. You have something that the body doesn't even recognize as food. On the other hand, you have the medical journals quoting the U.S. Department of whatever, saying that you have to have at least 230 milligrams of sodium per day. Otherwise, you will die at a much earlier rate. You are in a situation where you're much more susceptible to disease and health problems, but you've got to have enough salt. But yet, our medical profession is telling people, you got to get all the sodium out you can.
And iodine is part of that too, right?
Oh, yeah. You've got
adding iodine to salt because people, their thyroids aren't working because of it.
Yes, but don't get me started on that iodine that's added.
Next show.
There are different kinds of iodine, and some will kill you and some will help you, and it's all just a big mishmash, and that's why some people are stupid enough to study this and tell people about it, and I hope you're listening because some of this stuff is worthwhile. So don't worry about sodium, just worry about the source of the sodium. You have to have at least a certain amount, a healthy amount of true sodium, but it has to be the formula for basically what you have in sea salt, and it will be good for you. If you burn everything out and just only end up with the sodium chloride that's left, which we call table salt, that stuff is absolutely right. It's just absolutely terrible for you. Oddly enough, the good stuff will stabilize blood pressure, will stabilize your insulin, will stabilize your thyroid activity.
Wow.
And yet, what they do is they burn the daylights out of it, and then they add iodine back to it so you don't get goiters, which is a thyroid problem.
So you could get rid of all the table salt in your house. Something you learned today. Get rid of it, out the door, and buy sea salt.
Yep, it's as simple as that.
Thanks,
And
Steve.
there's an outfit out of southern Utah. I guess I can quote a name because I can do anything I want to on this program, can't I? Except say nasty words.
Yes.
But anyway, there's an outfit called Real Salt. It's out of a sea salt bed that's being mined down in southern Utah,
Yum.
in Redmond, Utah. And you can get it in your grocery stores, and that stuff is good for you. And don't be afraid of it. But the table salt, like she says, throw it out.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Steve Shenk on food. Go to steveshenk.me. We'll see you again in the next show.